All right, well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar on financing efficiency improvements using energy savings performance contracts. My name is Sarah Lee, and I am the Clean Energy Engagement Specialist here at the University of Michigan Graham Sustainability Institute. I organize this webinar series and help facilitate stakeholder engagement in partnership with the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, otherwise known as EGLE, along with Dr. Sarah Mills, the manager of this EGLE collaboration at Graham. So we developed the Clean Energy and Energy Management webinar series with the goal of providing local governments across the state with practical advice for taking action related to clean energy. We hope by highlighting the work that Michigan communities are already undertaking with respect to energy efficiency and renewable energy, we can demystify it a bit for other local governments and show that these actions are possible and are happening in communities big and small. So during today's webinar, you will be able to submit questions and comments via the questions feature near the bottom of the GoToWebinar console, which should be on the right side of your screen. We encourage you to submit questions as they occur to you throughout the webinar by entering them into this questions field. And when you submit a question, I will be the only one to view it, so don't panic if you don't see any questions populating. So for today's webinar, I'm thrilled to introduce Jake Wilkinson, an engineer at EGLE, who will provide an overview of performance contracts today before turning it over to Battle Creek's Assistant City Manager, Ted Deering, and Baraga County Clerk, Wendy Gaudreau, who will share their past experiences using performance contracts. Afterwards, I will facilitate a panel discussion with our speakers and weave in as many audience questions as I can. And as I'm sure many of our audience members can attest, you never know what a day will bring in the life of a local government official. So unfortunately, Wendy has to pop off the presentation a little early today. But if anyone has any questions for her that we aren't able to address, still feel free to submit them in the questions feature, and I'll be happy to pass them along to her after the webinar. All right, so to keep things moving, I will pass things over to Jake for his presentation. Let's see here. Jake, if you want to share your camera, and I'm going to change presenters now. Should be set.
All right. Hello, everyone. I am Jake Wilkinson. I'm an engineer with EGLE Energy Services, and there's my contact information. So EGLE being the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, formerly known as the Department of Environmental Quality. So this is a somewhat standard slide for our presentations. It's just kind of our recommended path if you're looking at energy management in your facility. So first, we recommend benchmarking, because as the old saying goes, you can't manage what you don't measure. And that way you can compare your building against other buildings and kind of get an idea where you fall. It can also help identify billing errors. We've had a lot of those found in the past, as well as unexpected spikes in demand, which can obviously increase your bill significantly. So then you would move on to the energy audit. There's 3 levels of energy audits as defined by ASHRAE, which is the American Society of Heating and Refrigeration Engineers. I think I messed that up a little bit, but levels 1, 2, and 3. Starting with 1, it's a very simple walkthrough audit, usually completed within a couple hours. And you can even get those in many areas free from your electric utility. So they'd come through, look at what you have in your building, and then give you some basic recommendations on how to improve. 2 is kind of a mid-level, and then level 3 is a very detailed analysis, usually involving energy modeling and deep dives into what your specific equipment is and how it's performing. Sometimes that's also referred to as an investment grade audit, and that is likely what would be needed before moving into a performance contract, which is I'll get into in the next slide. After the audits, that's when you would actually do your energy efficiency upgrades. So energy efficiency is still, in most cases, not all, there are some outliers, things that have very long paybacks, but in most cases, it's still more cost effective to do energy efficiency than it is to jump straight to renewable energy. So, you know, rather than overpaying on a renewable system and then producing more than you need, once you've done the efficiency upgrades, do your efficiency first, and then move on to renewables once you know how much capacity you actually need, especially now that net metering has kind of gone away in Michigan. So it doesn't make financial sense to overbuy on renewables before doing the simple efficiency or simpler efficiency measures. And then once you've done all those, then we would say you look at renewable energy. So most places I would say you're looking at solar. Wind can also be an option depending on the land and, you know, zoning regulations and other things. But solar is by far the most common that we see in renewables right now. So I am also a member of the Energy Services Coalition, the Michigan chapter specifically. It is a membership of energy service companies focused on promoting energy savings performance contracting as a viable option to do these upgrades in Michigan. We meet as an executive committee usually every month, maybe every other month, depending on schedules. And we usually try and organize 2 to 3 education sessions per year for our members. That can range from everything from, we did one on solar, we've talked about doing one on policy, but that has not been arranged yet. So hopefully that'll come soon. Just any technologies that might intertwine with a performance contract and might affect the project going forward. So try and keep our members informed of what's out there and what might be coming. We also do an annual awards event to recognize projects that were completed in Michigan. Usually award 5 to 6 projects a year, and do an in-person, well, we were doing them before COVID, but obviously that's affected a lot of things. In-person awards event where we kind of have people share their experiences and what they did and then present the awards to those projects. It's been a really good event for us in the past, and I know the attendees generally say it's worthwhile attending. If you want any more information, that's the link down there, and I can share this presentation with Sarah, and she can send it out to attendees after the fact if there's interest there. But like I said, that's the website for the Energy Services Coalition. So what is performance contracting? Specifically energy savings performance contracting, ESPC, sometimes also referred to as guaranteed energy savings performance contracting. But it's a budget neutral approach to manage building improvements and to reduce your on-site energy and water use, which will obviously increase your operational efficiency, because the goal is to improve your, you know, your boilers, your chillers, whatever equipment you have in the facility, reduce the energy use while maintaining occupant comfort and all the same services that you've had in the past. So by partnering with an ESCO, you can pay for facility upgrades using your future energy savings. And so oftentimes, ideally, it doesn't happen every time, but you wouldn't have to tap into additional capital budgets. You would pay for your project through the savings that are generated by the improvements made to your building. So what are the financing options? So the energy services company, or the ESCO, they can finance the project. From what I've heard from some of my contacts within the ESCOs, since I don't work with it every day like they do, that's becoming less common, but it is still an option for those interested. Bank loans can also be an option, or any other loans that you might be able to get. Bonds can be used for financing the project. And in some cases, the bonds wouldn't even need to go to community votes and get approved by the community, because you're not using new taxpayer funding. You're just utilizing your existing budget to pay for these upgrades, or your future budget. But it'll get a little clearer, I think, on the next slide. And then, of course, grants and incentives are always an option as well. So our office offers grants for, we have the Community Energy Management Program. So that can be a good option if you're looking to upgrade your buildings. You know, we don't provide a ton of funding, I guess, when you're looking at multi-million-dollar projects. You know, most of ours are 20,000, 25,000 at max for a project, but at least it can help you some. And then utilities often offer you incentives for improving your efficiency. You're paying, most often you're paying into those programs, so if you don't use it, you're only hurting yourself. And there really can be some significant incentives depending on what you're doing. So we always encourage you to reach out to your electric utility and see what they're offering. Another point here is the reason that I heard from the ESCOs, and it might be best to talk to them directly, but that they're not financing as many projects themselves is because they're interested in getting the customer the best interest rate that they can. And so that's not always through their financing mechanisms, because most of them, or at least I know one in particular mentioned it, I would be surprised if it wasn't true for most, if not all of them, they don't make money on the financing portion of it. They make money on the upgrades that they do. So the better rate they can get you, the more you can do in your building. So that benefits you in the long term, and it also benefits them because that's where they make their money, is actually doing the improvements, not the financing. So they'll be able to work with you and help you find out what the best option is for you if you go that route. This graph doesn't seem to be showing the one bar. There it is. This is kind of just a really generic graph, but it's kind of the ideal method here. So the before line, as you can see, the red is all your current utility spend. So that's, you know, whatever your current utility budget is, and that I would include maintenance costs in that and everything as well, because those can really add up, I know, for older equipment. And then after your install here in the middle, you know, the red line has decreased, your utility spend has gone down, your energy costs have gone down, maintenance costs have hopefully gone down. And then, so the blue section there is your debt payment. So, you know, whether you've done a bond or you've done a bank loan, however you're financing this project, however you're going to pay for it, you obviously have a payment that you have to make for that. So you're taking a portion of your savings during the contract period and you're paying off that debt. There should be some also above that, also guaranteed, where it's just a reduced, it's just savings, because it's just reduced your budget a little bit, your costs. So the green at the top there is supposed to represent that. So even beyond your new utility spend and your debt payment, you should still be saving money. And then after the contract period, you still have the same utility spend that you did after the upgrades, but now you have no debt payment. And so all of that above your current utility spend is all savings. And so it's important there too to recognize these are guaranteed savings, and that's one of the benefits of going with a performance contract, is all this is guaranteed by the ESCO, by the company that you're working with. So again, we're kind of in that here. Why would you use an energy performance contract? The speed of the process from beginning to post-construction can be much faster than normal, because again, hopefully you won't have to go through a bonding process and get the community vote and all that. You may have to, but if you can't, if you don't have to, that can increase your speed. And you have a single point of contact, making sure that everything's getting done. And they're going to be your single point after the project is done. So you always know who you're reaching out to. You always know who to call if you're having issues or if there's something you need to change. And you're not dealing with, you know, 10 different contractors trying to do different sections of all the work. That's all managed by the energy services company, excuse me. Quality assurance is kind of what I was getting to before last slide. Performance and your savings are guaranteed through the contract. So the contract lays out that you have to achieve a certain level of savings through the upgrades that are made. So if they're not made, then if the savings are not achieved, then you get payment from the performance contracting company, because again, they've made that guarantee. Performance-wise, again, they've made their promises, they've made their guarantees in the contract. You have to achieve, occupant comfort. You have to achieve a certain level of performance from this new equipment that they've installed, and if not, then they need to fix it. So again, you have that single point of contact. You're having issues. Maybe you did a boiler upgrade and it's not performing how it should be. They're going to come in and they're going to take care of the problem. And then in many cases, it can be a budget neutral financing option. So you don't have to go out for new capital. You don't have to bond out, a whole new multi-million-dollar project that would be coming straight from taxpayer funds. You can use the savings that are in your utility budget or in your maintenance budget to pay for the financing. So it can be a very attractive option especially for municipalities, for schools, a lot of other public entities that don't have access to a lot of capital. We know budgets are tight. So this is a situation where performance contracting can really be a benefit. So the benefits here, again, guaranteed savings. That's one of the biggest points here in my mind, is your single point of contact and your guaranteed savings. So you're not gonna, go and do all this work and install a project or install all this new equipment and then have it not perform how you want and be disappointed and end up, losing money in it. Integrated project analysis, design, and construction. So that's kind of what I was getting at with the audits at the beginning. So if you agree to work with a performance contracting company, they're going to come in, they're going to analyze your whole system, they're going to do analysis, they're going to do modeling, they're going to design your new system and do all the calculations associated with that to make sure that this project is going to make ends meet on the finance end, and also to make sure that your building is going to perform well. And then they're going to handle all the construction stuff too. So it's kind of a holistic approach and one point of contact, which is really beneficial. Because you're guaranteeing these savings over the service or over the course of a contract, you have long-term monitoring and of the savings and the performance. So I don't know honestly what the average contract is, length of contract is, because I don't work in it every day. I know the max is 20 years based in the legislation that enables it. But say it's a 10-year contract, 15-year contract, whatever it is, you're going to have the option to have that your savings monitored and your equipment performance monitored throughout that whole period. I know there are options where you don't pay for the guarantee or you don't pay for that continual monitoring. I would say you're probably better off doing it if you can, just because that way you have that long-term kind of risk aversion. Services and materials based on life cycle costs. So rather than just saying, oh, well, we need to replace a boiler, the cheapest one is, X amount of dollars. The more expensive one is 2 times as much. But then the cheaper one may cost you more in utility bills on the long run. So over the course of the life of that equipment, the cheapest one up front could cost you far more in the life cycle costs. So that is all part of that design and analysis that is done at the beginning of the project by the energy services company. They're looking at life cycle costs because they want to get you the cheapest equipment over the life of that equipment. So that is going to be a big benefit, and oftentimes the equipment's going to perform better long term too. I know this last point is a big one for a lot of these facilities that do have a hard time coming up with capital. Elimination of your deferred maintenance. I know a lot of buildings have a long list of maintenance that they haven't been able to get to, and you got equipment that might be about to fail or near end of life, and they just can't come up with the money. This is a good way to address those issues. So at the end of the project, you can get a lot of your stuff done, a lot of your systems upgraded, and do it all in one shot, and then worry about it after, maintain it after that. So what's eligible? Any measures that pay for themselves. So obviously lighting is an easy one that's usually included in performance contracts because it pays for itself in a fairly short period of time. But again, with performance contracting, you can have pretty long contract periods. So that opens it up to a lot of other things like your air handling equipment, your boilers, your, chillers if you have them, and just all sorts of large scale equipment in your building. If it pays for itself in the contract period, then it's eligible. Operational savings, so that's anything that's going to reduce your costs from an energy efficiency standpoint, or even maintenance. I mentioned that before. We have a lot of cases where you've got a boiler that's, or any piece of equipment, I keep going back to boilers, but you've got a boiler that's old, maybe nearing end of life. Your maintenance costs are just keep going up on it. You're paying a lot of money just to keep it running, but that money could be used through a performance contract to, get an upgrade and to get a new boiler that you don't have to do as much maintenance on over the course of it's the next few years. And so that kind of goes into the next point, future cost avoidance. Anything that's going to reduce your cost in the future over the life of that contract can be accounted towards the savings in the contract. So again, maintenance costs, any operational costs, obviously energy costs, water costs as well. If you do any upgrades that are going to reduce your water usage, those savings can be counted towards the project. Renewable energy. We would go back to the beginning of this where I talked about we encourage efficiency before renewables, but renewables can still be used. Certainly there is a place for those. Certainly they are becoming more and more cost effective all the time. So renewables are eligible for performance contracting as well. Behavioral training, that one, you can have the most efficient systems in your world or in the world in your building, but if they're not operated effectively, then they're not going to achieve the savings they should. So if you need to have your equipment operators trained, that can also be part of the contract. And then buying down of debt is also eligible. I think that's all I have. I will add here that, I don't work in performance contracting every day. I am not the expert. There are definitely better people, but I will be able to get you to the right person if you need to, if you want to reach out to me. Definitely refer to anyone that's done it in the past and their experience with it. Wendy and Ted here are going to give their experiences as well. So they're good resources. Talk to an ESCO, talk to a performance contracting company. They're going to be able to walk you through the process and be helpful, even if you're not sure if you want to go that route yet. So if you have any questions, like I said, my contact information is at the first slide, and this can be passed along to everybody. And I look forward to any questions you might have. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Jake. That was an awesome overview, a lot of good information. I'm going to invite Wendy Goodrow to come on to start off our discussion today. Wendy is the Baraga County Clerk. And Wendy, would you please share with us your experiences with performance contracting, and if you have any advice for communities that are considering using one?
Okay, sure. My name is Wendy Goodrow, and I'm the County Clerk for Baraga County. I'm also the Administrator de facto, and I also wear the hat of Facilities Manager, not by choice. But Baraga County did a performance contract back in 2014, and we did it more out of necessity than anything. For several years, we knew we had to do something, but there were so many things that it felt overwhelming at the time. I would have snow on my windowsill in my office. The biggest thing was our heating system. It was housed in an old building, an old retired jail, and that building had been condemned a few years prior. So that boiler was housed in the basement there and piped over to the courthouse. And so that system was probably at least 50 years old. So we had a lot of issues that we were limping along at the time. So again, we did the project more out of necessity. We had been approached in 2013 by somebody who introduced us to the idea of energy audit or a performance project. And it wasn't until 2014 that we entered into a contract with Honeywell. And we certainly didn't have the resources to pay for a project like that. So we issued bonds in the amount of 1.5 million. Our project for the energy upgrades was 1,330,000, but part of the project we did a demo of the retired jail. So we actually did 3 buildings: our courthouse, which was over 100 years old, our administration building, which was built in the mid-70s, and our jail, which was built in the early 90s. We did water, lighting retrofit, windows, and a HVAC system. So we have a chiller, a boiler, and an air exchanger. We have experienced a vast majority of our savings. What is paying for our project was more the capital cost avoidance. We have seen some savings in the utilities, so you know that is helpful as well. But a vast majority of our savings comes from the cost avoidance. So we replaced the windows in the courthouse and added a boiler system and a chiller. We did all of the bathrooms, and we did the lighting retrofit in all 3 buildings as well. I think if I were to talk about the challenges of the project, because we're so far removed from the folks at Honeywell, the distance made it difficult, but they were great. They met all of our concerns. I guess my biggest thing through the what I would recommend is really have a good understanding of the scope of the work. We ran into issues once the windows were installed. They didn't naturally fit on the inside, and we had some gaps in insulation and different things like that, which were things that we just really weren't prepared for. But again, working with Honeywell, the folks at Honeywell were really good to work for. And so we stayed in our contract after the project for 3 years, and we realized all the savings that they guaranteed. So we actually stepped out of that contract after 3 years.
All right. Well, thank you, Wendy. Really good information, and I hope a lot of people on the call will find that really relatable and useful going forward. So thanks again. If you have to pop off, feel free to do so, but stay if you can. But for now, I would like to introduce Ted Deering, who is Battle Creek's Assistant City Manager. And Ted, it's my understanding that your performance contracting project was on a little bit larger scale. So I'd love if you could, share more about your experiences and tell us how your projects went.
Thank you, Sarah, and good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. So, yeah, let me get into the details of our project, which, somewhat like Wendy's, is a little bit mature at this point. We actually started planning in 2012, did the construction primarily in 2013, and wrapped up with the commissioning in 2014. And I think that we, if I remember correctly, we initially became aware of the opportunity to do a performance contract when one of our staff members actually heard about, heard a presentation from an ESCO company at a conference. So we began to research that a little bit more, got a little bit more information from some of the professionals in the business, and then we were able to determine really that our large indoor-outdoor recreation center that we had at the time was pretty ripe for an energy project. So the building in question is known as Full Blast, and it's roughly 88,000 square feet. It's a recreation center with an indoor and an outdoor water park. And there are 3 large gymnasiums. There's a food court area. There's a fitness center, locker rooms. There's a small auditorium actually in the building, and quite a bit of office space as well. The building wasn't really that old. It was built in the mid 90s, but on the surface you could see that there were certainly some opportunities for energy efficiencies. Lighting, for example, has, that's been mentioned a couple of times, building envelope improvements, and certainly some upgrades to what were relatively inefficient HVAC systems at that time. And again, with a little bit of help, we saw the potential for energy savings if we could go ahead with a contract. So we did a little bit more research. I actually think through the Energy Services Coalition, we were able to find a template for a request for proposal for energy services from ESCO companies. And we issued that RFP. It basically had 3 parts to it. It had the technical energy audit to inform a project proposal, obviously the construction and the implementation, the commissioning and the financing, and then the post-implementation monitoring, which Wendy talked about for just a second. So, we were looking for a company certainly that had the technical capabilities, including not only lighting and mechanical systems, but actually lead strategies as well, because we wanted to be as energy efficient as possible. And we actually ended up with a company by the name of Ameresco to do the project. When we started the project, we were focused on the rec center, but we quickly expanded to some other buildings. The original energy services agreement was modified right off the bat to include some commercial space that we owned as the city as part of a parking structure. It was retail space on the first level of a parking structure. And it really hadn't been built for that purpose. So it was, I guess I would describe it as horribly inefficient. And we actually expanded Ameresco's duties to include some energy conservation members as part of the larger commercial build out of that space. And that was things like, new windows and doors, insulation, mechanical upgrades, and water conservation measures, things along those lines. And then about halfway through the project, we began to renovate the city-owned Kellogg Arena. And that project, in the case of the arena, we didn't really have a traditional energy savings scenario there where you would pay for the improvements through energy savings over time. It was really more of an issue of cost avoidance, future cost avoidance. We had a lot of capital needs there, and we liked the idea actually of working with an energy services company so that we could make some decisions that weren't necessarily going to produce energy savings, but that we wanted to make knowing that we did them with energy efficiency in mind. So, the original full blast project was about $1.3 million, and we had a guaranteed energy savings of $84,000 on that project. The parking structure, if I remember right, was about $600,000. We paid that up front. And then the Kellogg Arena project was about $2.6 million. And again, that didn't have an energy savings component to it, but we did certainly avoid a lot of future capital costs. At the full blast project, I'd say we ended up with probably 8 different energy conservation measures as part of that project. Certainly lighting, building envelopes, controls for our HVAC system. We went to a web-based project that was a lot easier for us to monitor and for contractors to monitor. HVAC systems, we had 2 big boilers that were replaced as part of that project. Then a bunch of water conservation measures, mostly controlling flows in showers and sinks and that kind of thing. We did actually introduce a little bit of new technology too. I know Jake was talking about renewable energy. We did add a tube-based solar array to help heat our outdoor pool as part of that project. And then we added a hyperchlorite generation system, which basically converts salt into chlorine so that we could stop buying basically and certainly stop handling chlorine. And then you may have noticed on one of Jake's slides too, he talked about behavioral training, and we did have a component in there, staff training, just around energy consumption and ways that we could be more energy efficient in the building. Again, I mentioned it took about 2 years to go through it. We did the monitoring a little bit longer than what Wendy said. I think we did like the first 5 years. And then after that point, we decided that we just would discontinue that part of the project after confirming the savings in the first 5 years. Overall, I think it went well. There are a lot of variables that come into play changes in your basic operational environment baseline and utility costs and other things that sometimes can make it a little bit difficult to determine your savings. But again, we didn't have any problem meeting the energy guarantee. And then obviously, we felt a lot better about the energy efficiency of the building and the fact that we had reduced our carbon footprint. So all in all, I would say it was a successful project.
All right, thank you, Ted. Again, great information. I find it really interesting and important to know that it seems like these contracts work for, the smaller scale administrative buildings and local government buildings to water parks. So that's really exciting. That's cool. I would like to invite back all of our panelists and our speakers for Q&A and some questions. Reminder to audience members, if you have any questions, please submit them through the questions feature on the GoToWebinar console, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. So for Ted, you talked about this a little bit, but were there any really, or what was it? I lost my spot. Sorry, on my question. Given your experience with the project, was there anything that you learned along the way that you wish you knew from the beginning that you would like to share with someone who might be considering a performance contract? Or were there any surprises that you found either in your results or in the process?
Yeah. I guess the first thing I would say I learned was the process, right? I mean, I was completely unaware. I managed all 3 of these projects and I had no experience whatsoever with an energy performance contract. So certainly learning the process from, beginning to end was very valuable to me. Everything from the technical energy audit right through commissioning and then monitoring at the end was important. It was a pretty steep learning curve for me. I don't know that I would say that there were surprises so much as a couple things you probably should be aware of. For example, some of the savings that you're going to get, you're going to stipulate those up front. We either stipulated them up front or after one measurement, we were able to confirm that that was the savings. So for example, if you change out a light bulb, right, you can see what the energy consumption of the old light bulb was and then what the new one is, and then you stipulate that savings up front. And so that was something, we had to kind of get used to the idea that we weren't going to do a lot of in-depth monitoring post-construction. We were stipulating a lot of those savings up front. The other thing I think you have to be prepared for too is Jake talked about this a little bit too, is the idea that the ESCO company is going to handle all of the contracts associated with the project. So for our purchasing department, that was a little bit of a shock because we weren't out there bidding all of those contracts. We selected an energy company to do the work, and then it really became their responsibility to do the bidding and manage the contracts. It is, I think Jake mentioned this as well. That's where they make their money, right? If they're a little bit more efficient in their contracts, they're going to make a little bit of money doing that. So getting used to that as part of the process, I think, was part of what we learned. But again, all in all, choose your company wisely. We felt great about the company we worked with. We loved the on-site engineer that we had. But I could see if you didn't love your on-site engineer, it could be a real headache.
Okay. Well, it sounds like something that you had to get used to might have been a good thing then too, if your ESCO was kind of taking care of things for you.
Yeah, no doubt. It's a complex project, right? Again, we had 8 or 9 different ECMs, what we call them, energy conservation measures, and we did introduce some new technology that we weren't familiar with at all, particularly the hyperchlorite system. And so, yeah, having a good, solid working relationship there, somebody who can kind of walk you through these things is pretty important.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if this is different from anything that you spoke about, but did you encounter any hiccups in this process that you had to, overcome or maybe scramble to overcome?
Yeah, not too many, really. Obviously, we kept throwing new projects into the mix, and so just sorting our way through, what that meant, both contractually as part of the ESA, which is the Energy Services Agreement, which we kept modifying. And I talked about the buildings that we added to the project, but we also probably did 5 or 6 different change orders during the project too, because we'd find as we were implementing new technology or simply as just as we were working our way through some of the basic ECMs that oh, hey, there's something that we could do over here that's a little bit different. A good example is, we figured out while we were working on our indoor and outdoor pool that our sand filters, the sand was just, it was past its useful life, I guess I would say. And so we weren't able to get, or we weren't going to be able to get the energy efficiency we were looking for some of the improvements unless we changed out the sand in the sand filter. So, a lot of that kind of thing came up during the process. But again, because we had a good working relationship with the ESCO company, I think we were able to get through most of that pretty easily. But if you do one of these, I wouldn't count on necessarily that what you start with is what you're going to end with in terms of a contract, because in our experience, we had to change it several times.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I guess in hearing from your experiences as well as Wendy's, it sounded like, I guess the traditional performance contract that Jake was describing, you use the energy savings to pay off that's your financing essentially. But it sounds like both of you used different types of financing to help with upfront costs. Could you talk a little bit more about why you made that decision and how you ended up going about financing?
Yeah, and you're right. In our case, we approached it 3 different ways. We're self-insured here at the city of Battle Creek, and at the time that we were doing this project, our risk fund was pretty healthy. And so we actually self-financed the full blast piece, and that's the piece that had a guaranteed energy savings. So, and I think Jake, kind of, he spelled this out pretty well in his presentation. We knew we were going to get an annual savings. We knew what the energy reduction was going to be and how that would impact the full blast budget. And so essentially the difference is what we paid back to the risk fund over the life of the contract. In our case, it was 15 years. So we used some internal financing. The downtown piece, which was the parking structure, we just simply, we asked our downtown development authority to pick up the cost of that. So we just paid that up front without necessarily expecting energy savings over time on that one. Again, that was a little bit more cost avoidance than it was energy savings. And then the Kellogg Arena piece, which was the larger piece, we actually financed that both with some grant funds and with some capital improvement bonds that the city had issued to do a variety of capital improvement projects. So we definitely had a little bit of everything going in order to pull the whole project off.
Okay. This may be a question for Jake. Do you happen to know, are you able to combine or do use like a Michigan Saves, like low interest loan to help with your performance contract? Can you kind of combine these two things if you're using a bank loan?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't know specifically, but I don't see why you couldn't do that. Michigan Saves is a good option for energy loans. They provide pretty good interest rates in long terms, so that can definitely bring your debt payment down and help make the project more feasible. So yeah, I wouldn't see any reason that you couldn't use that.
Okay, cool. Some audience questions are coming in. I want to ask, does your staff or your department keep track of the energy savings, or does it fall on the ESCO? And what's the best practice there?
Yeah, it really does. Yeah, I think typically as part of these projects, you'll probably have some kind of monitoring agreement with the ESCO company. So they're going to be responsible, and they'll spell out in the initial energy services agreement exactly how they're going to do the monitoring. Now, as I mentioned, some of that's stipulated to up front, but then on the back end, they'll come in and do the annual monitoring. Now, you do pay for that, and usually there's a clause in your ESA that will say, you can do this as long as you want to do this, up to the full 15 years. But if you want to opt out at any time, you're able to do that. So I do think that the best practice is to allow the ESCO company to do the monitoring. But in our case, we did opt out after about 5 years.
Okay.
And I'll add that's from what I've heard from a lot of municipalities or other people that have done these projects. That's not uncommon to opt out at a certain point once you're comfortable with the savings that you've been getting and they've been certified for a number of years. you know, there is a little bit of risk in doing that. And, you know, if something does go wrong and you've opted out of that, then you don't have that guarantee there anymore. But, you know, the first several years, I would say, are definitely the most important, making sure that that is in place and that the guarantees are there. And then it's kind of a personal decision if you do want to opt out after that, once you are pretty secure in making sure that the savings are there.
Okay. Do either of you know if there are sample RFQs or bids anywhere that are generic that we can share with municipalities? I don't know if Jake, like a colleague of yours, has something like that that we could send out afterwards.
You know, I would go back and check through our documents, but I think I had mentioned I'm a member of the Energy Services Coalition. I think they have some sample documents like that that are publicly available to anyone that wants to use them. So I could check on that and get back with you, and maybe we can send that out if you know there's some interest there. But I do believe those documents exist, and we could share those.
It's hard to remember for sure, but I'm pretty sure that we actually got our sample template from the Energy Services Coalition, so that we were able to find great templates to work from.
Okay, excellent. And I just want to mention, I am seeing some comments in the chat about the Michigan Saves question. You can use Michigan Saves. That's good for smaller project, and PACE financing, I guess, is an option as well. So awesome. Let's see here. Can you explain more about stipulating the savings and what that means? I think one of you guys mentioned that in your presentation.
Sure, I can jump in on that and let Jake kind of fill in around the edges if he wants to. But again, you know, some of the savings are going to be assumed, I guess is a way to put it, right? So we had, if I remember correctly, in full blast, we may have replaced about 300 plus lighting fixtures, right? And we could we could determine what the energy consumption of the existing fixture was, and then what the energy consumption of the new fixture would be. And so in essence, we would do the math on that, make the calculation that say, okay, so we're going to stipulate that once this fixture goes in, that we're going to get that savings, and we're going to get that savings in theory during the life of the ESCO contract. So in other words, we're not going to come back and monitor in any way every year those savings that could be stipulated up front. And lighting is a good example of that. And there are a few others that we stipulated to as well. So again, basically when you're signing the contract, and usually what they'll do, at least in my experience, is they'll lay out the ES or the ECMs and just say, hey, here's how we're going to monitor this one. And one might say stipulated, and one might provide a protocol for monitoring. In some cases, you might just do a one-time measurement in the first year, and then you might stipulate after that point that the savings that was determined during that one-time measurement was the savings that you're going to have going forward. So again, it'll probably be different for the different ECMs. And often what happens too is if it's going to be too difficult to monitor, I mean, if the process of actually monitoring a savings is so cost prohibitive that you don't want to engage in that activity, you might stipulate that savings up front as well.
All right, thank you. Let's see.
I don't really have a lot to add to that. I think that.
Go ahead, Jake.
Yeah, I said I don't have a lot to add. I think Ted did a good job explaining that. You know, like you said, with lighting and some other things, it's pretty easy to calculate those savings. And unless your hours of operation change drastically, there's not likely to be a deviation from that calculation, from that calculated savings. So in those cases, it doesn't always make a lot of sense to like monitor those. You just kind of stipulate those and move on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Next question, in what cases do ESCOs take advantage of utility incentives, like from DTE or consumers in financing?
Yeah, I can tell you in our case, we got some huge utility rebates as part of this project. We just relied on our ESCO company to work with the utility providers, and both the local gas company and the electric company. Actually, I think total we may have gotten over $100,000 in incentives, as it were, or rebates. I can't remember exactly what the technical term is for how we were refunded money, but there were some real benefits for doing this type of a project and working with local utility companies to see what they'll provide in incentives or benefits for doing a performance contract.
Yeah, I would add that I would hope, at least, and I would think that in almost all cases they would be working with the utility. The utility rebates and incentives can really add up for a lot of these projects, especially when you're looking at lighting and HVAC equipment. Some of the bigger energy users in a building, they have pretty good incentives going for those, and they can really help make the projects more feasible. So there's not really any reason not to work with them. I know I've heard for some, not ESCO projects, not performance contracting projects, but for some, just in some other work, they do really small projects. Sometimes the contractor says it's not worth the time in dealing with it. But when you're talking a multi-million-dollar project, in most cases for a performance contract, those incentives can really add up, and it really does make sense for the ESCO to deal with that. As said here, but I would assume that in those cases, in my experience, most of the time the contractor is the one dealing with all that and doing all the paperwork required. So it's really not extra work for the customer to do anyway.
Excellent. Well, that's great. Great to know. All right, I think I've got kind of a trickier question here, maybe for Jake. Can energy saving performance contracts be applied to energy use optimization, such as green peaking? Do you know about that?
I don't know specifically, but I would think that could be part of the project. I mean, generally anything that's cost savings, like Ted and even Wendy mentioned, that a large part of their savings was more future cost avoidance than it was actually efficiency savings. And so if you're doing like kind of some peak monitoring or peak shaving, if you want to call it, demand charges can really be significant too. So if you're trying to reduce those, I would think that would still count towards your cost avoidance. I said I don't know specifically if that's laid out, but I would still see that as just a future cost avoidance and would think it would be eligible.
All right, thank you.
Now, I should add too, I don't know if that alone, I mean, it would depend on your situation, but I don't know if that alone would be enough to justify a performance contract, but it seems like it could be part of it.
Okay. All right, one other question here. Are the ESCOs and performance contracts arranged that the ESCO has the daily on-site personnel? Or are they under the ESCO, or do they remain under the municipality? And have there been contracts where the performance contract completely has all the personnel like working on the project under their company rather than being on the municipality payroll? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think this has to do who's doing the work. But go ahead.
Yeah,
Maybe you understood it better than I.
I'm tracking that question. I'm not exactly sure, but I mean, the ESCO company in our case had personnel on site, basically managing the project almost on a day-to-day basis. We didn't necessarily have any staff to do the project. They brought their people in, and of course they hired the contractors and brought them in as well. So again, it didn't have any impact on our staffing levels, and the work was managed on site by the ESCO.
Okay, great.
Yeah, again, not sure 100% on that question, but if they're talking about during the course of the project, yeah, the ESCO should be handling all that, and they should have their staff on site. After the fact, I wouldn't expect anyone to be there every day, certainly. I'm sure they'll come in and check in and they've got to monitor the project, but operationally after that, that should be on the part of the customer for the most part. They'll still be involved, but they won't be there every day.
Yeah, I will say, Sarah, in our case, I mentioned that for the full blast project, we actually implemented a new a web-based control system. And what I would say is that the ESCO company monitored our activities, monitored our HVAC systems through that system for probably a good year after the project was over with. They would get alerts and everything else if anything was, if we had a problem with the boiler or whatever. So we did get some good follow-up in monitoring, outside of the formal monitoring contract for at least a year after the project was complete.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. And I do want to mention, I saw in a comment too that the Energy Service Coalition does have standard documents online. It is confirmed. So you can check out their website for more information. Or Jake, if you want to send it to me, I can also include that in the follow-up email to attendees. And I think we are wrapping up here. So I'm going to share my screen again. And just advertise some upcoming events we have. MISCON, the Michigan Sustainability Conference, is coming up in June here. Some really great webinars and resources. So check that out. And then later in mid-June, we do have a Michigan Saves webinar coming up. So look out at the Eagle website for registration there. And also, as people exit today, I do ask that you take our quick exit survey that will pop up at the end of the webinar, or you can take it tomorrow when you receive our follow-up email. And registration for MISCON, or the link to that, will be included in that follow-up email as well. So thank you so much to Ted and Jake and Wendy for sharing your experiences and this information. I think this was really great. So have a good rest of your evening or afternoon.